My mom looked me in the eyes and said, "You were always fine on your own." Then I found out what fine actually cost me. Background: what I thought I knew. I'm Margaret. Maggie, to people I love. I'm 41 years old, I live in Columbus, Ohio, and until 8 months ago, I believed my family was reasonably normal. I want to be clear about something before I start. I am not a dramatic person. I don't post venting threads. I've never in my life written anything like this. But a therapist I started seeing in February told me that writing things down, the whole sequence, the full picture, can help you stop replaying it in your head at 2 a.m. So here I am, writing it down. If it helps someone else recognize what's happening in their own family, then maybe that's worth something too. My mother is Patricia. She's 68, recently retired from 23 years as an administrative assistant at a regional insurance company. She lives in the same 3-bedroom house in Worthington, Ohio where my sister and I grew up, a solid paid-off house that's worth somewhere between $310,000 and $340,000 depending on which Zillow estimate you believe. My father passed away 12 years ago from a cardiac event at 62, and since then my mother has lived alone in that house. She has a modest pension from her job, Social Security, and a savings account that I never had reason to think much about. My sister is Diane. She's 36, 5 years younger than me, and she lives 20 minutes from our mother in a rented apartment in Dublin, Ohio with her boyfriend of 4 years, a man named Kevin who has held, by my count, 6 different jobs since I've known him. Diane works part-time as a dental receptionist. She has a pleasant personality when things are going her way and a very different personality when they aren't. I say this not to be cruel but because it is relevant to everything that follows. I live in Columbus, about 30 minutes from my mother, with my husband Daniel and our 2 kids, Nora, who is 13, and James, who is 10. I work as a senior project manager for a mid-sized logistics company. Daniel is a high school history teacher. We are not wealthy. We have a mortgage, 2 car payments, 1 kid in braces, and a savings account we treat with the careful reverence of people who know how quickly things can unravel. We have never asked my mother for money. Not once. Not even when Daniel was between positions for 7 months in 2019 and I was quietly panicking every time I opened our banking app. We didn't ask because I was raised to believe that you figure it out yourself. That you don't burden your parents. That Patricia had her own life, her own needs, and her own modest resources, and it wasn't my place to go looking for help that should be going toward her retirement. I believed this completely. I believed it because my mother let me. The conversation that started everything. Last October, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening and asked if I could come over Saturday morning. "Just the 2 of us," she said. "I want to talk about the house." I didn't overthink it. She was 68, the house was big, and I'd been expecting for years that she might eventually want to downsize. I drove over Saturday morning with coffee and a box of pastries from the bakery she likes on High Street. She was waiting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad in front of her, which she uses when she's organized her thoughts in advance. That should have told me something. She told me she had decided to sell the house. I said that sounded reasonable, asked what she was thinking about next steps, whether she'd talked to a realtor, whether she'd thought about where she wanted to move. She said she'd already spoken to a realtor. She thought the house would list around $325,000. After fees and taxes, she expected to walk away with somewhere around $290,000. She slid the legal pad toward me. On it, she had written, "Split equally between Margaret and Diane, approximate $145,000 each." I looked at it. I felt warmth, honestly. I thought, that's generous. That's a gift. And then she said the sentence that changed everything. I wanted to make sure this felt fair, given that I've already been helping Diane for a while. I looked up from the legal pad. "Helping how?" I asked. My mother folded her hands on the table. She has this expression she gets, not defensive, exactly, but settled. Like she has already decided something and is waiting for you to accept it. "Financially," she said. "Over the years. She's had some difficult stretches." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "How much?" I asked. She told me she'd rather not go into specifics. That it wasn't really relevant, because the house split would make things equal. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that I needed to understand what we were talking about. Not because I wanted to fight, but because I was being asked to evaluate whether something was fair, and I couldn't do that without the full picture. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Over the last 9 or 10 years, I've probably given Diane somewhere around $85,000. The kitchen was very quiet. $85,000, I repeated. She needed help with rent several times. Her car. Some credit card situations. Kevin had a period where... Mom. I stopped her. Why didn't I know about this? And then she said the sentence I have heard in my head nearly every day since. I decided myself who to help. You were always managing fine on your own. I left about 20 minutes later. I hugged her at the door because I didn't want to leave in anger, and I drove to a gas station parking lot 2 blocks away and sat there for a long time. I wasn't crying, exactly. I was trying to do math. $85,000. Half of the house proceeds would be $145,000. Which meant that if you counted the actual total my mother intended to distribute between her 2 daughters, the number was $230,000 for Diane and $145,000 for me. And that assumed the $85,000 figure was accurate, which I had no reason to be certain about. I was not managing fine on my own, by the way. I was managing. That's a different thing. When Daniel was out of work for 7 months, I moved money around in ways that still make my stomach tighten. I have a savings account that I think about with relief because I built it carefully, dollar by dollar, with no assistance. And every year I did that, my sister was accepting tens of thousands of dollars from the same woman who looked at my situation and concluded I didn't need help. The decision hadn't been made without information. It had been made with the information that I was too proud to ask. Update 1. Learning the actual numbers. I want to be precise about what I did next, because it matters. I did not call Diane. I did not go back to my mother's house angry. I went home, I made dinner, I helped James with a science project, and after the kids were in bed I told Daniel everything. Daniel is a methodical, thoughtful person. He didn't react with outrage, which is one of the things I love about him. He listened, he asked a few questions, and then he said, "Before you do anything, you need to understand what you're actually dealing with. All of it." He was right. I spent the next 2 weeks being very calm and very thorough. First, I hired a family law attorney named Sandra Okonkwo for an initial consultation. I found her through a colleague at work who'd used her in an estate dispute. I paid $350 for 2 hours of her time, and I brought a notepad and wrote down everything she said. The core of what she told me: my mother had every legal right to give Diane whatever she wanted. There was no fraud, no undue influence that could be demonstrated, and no legal mechanism to claw back gifts given freely by a competent adult. The house was my mother's to sell and distribute as she saw fit. But Sandra also told me several things that were genuinely useful. She told me that if I intended to participate in any sale agreement, I should understand exactly what I was agreeing to. She told me that large financial gifts within a certain look-back period can affect Medicaid eligibility, which could become relevant if my mother ever needed long-term care. And she told me that I had every right to ask for full financial transparency before signing anything related to the sale. Second, I did some careful, patient research into the gift history. My mother, God love her, has never been good with digital boundaries. She still sends family documents to a shared email account that she set up years ago to organize holiday plans. I had the password. I went back through it methodically. I wasn't proud of this, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with. What I found: records of bank transfers, screenshots my mother had sent herself for mobile banking, a few email threads between her and Diane about specific amounts. The total was not $85,000. It was closer to $112,000. The transfers went back 11 years, not 9 or 10. They ranged from $1,500 to $18,000. There were at least 4 instances where my mother had transferred money to Diane within days of Diane asking for it, and I could see from the timing that several of these transfers had happened during periods when I knew my mother had spoken to me about watching her spending due to living on a fixed income. I made a spreadsheet. Date, amount, running total: $112,400 over 11 years. I printed it out and put it in a folder. Third, I looked at the house. A friend of mine, Karen, is a licensed real estate agent in the Columbus area. I asked her casually what the market looked like for houses like my mother's. She ran some comps without me telling her why. Her estimate was $328,000 to $345,000. The realtor my mother had already spoken to, I learned, was someone Diane had recommended, a woman who'd done a deal for Kevin's sister 2 years ago. That was the moment I understood that this was not a coincidence. Diane had been involved in setting up the sale. She was managing the process. Update 2. The family meeting I wasn't invited to. In November, I learned from my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, that there had been a family dinner at my mother's house 2 weeks prior. My mother, Diane, Kevin, and my mother's neighbor Florence, who is apparently a witness to everything these days. I had not been invited. I called my mother and asked about it, keeping my voice even. She said it was just dinner. She said Diane had brought over a lasagna. I asked if they had discussed the house sale. A pause. Some. I asked if Diane had expressed any opinions about the timeline. She mentioned she thought sooner might be better given the market. I asked if she thought it was appropriate that I wasn't there for a conversation about a sale that would affect me. My mother said, "Maggie, I don't need your permission to have dinner in my own house." I said, "No, you don't. But I'd appreciate being included in conversations about a significant financial decision that directly affects me." She said she'd have me over soon. I hung up and wrote down the date and content of the conversation in a notes document I was now keeping on my personal laptop. The next day, I called Sandra Okonkwo again. I told her about the dinner and about what I'd found regarding the gift history. I asked her, if my mother was to sell the house and give Diane half the proceeds, on top of the $112,000 already transferred, and then my mother required Medicaid-funded care within 5 years, what would the picture look like? Sandra explained the Medicaid 5-year look-back rule in some detail. She said that depending on how things were structured, the gifts to Diane could create complications. She said this wasn't a threat to wave around, but something I should understand clearly. She also said something else. If your mother ever needs long-term care and her assets have been depleted through gifts, the default expectation in most states is that family steps in. Do you know what your sister's financial situation actually looks like? I told her what I knew. Kevin's job history. Diane's part-time income. The rented apartment. Sandra said, then you might want to think about who would actually be in a position to help your mother if she needed it. I drove home in silence. Update 3. The conversation with Diane. I had been avoiding a direct conversation with Diane. Partly because I didn't trust myself to have it calmly, and partly because I wanted to have all my information organized before I did. By December, I was ready. I asked her to meet me for coffee. Not at our mother's house, not at her apartment. A coffee shop in Grandview where neither of us had any particular history. Neutral ground. She came in cheerful and immediately said something about how we should do this more often, just the two of us, and I let her order and get settled before I said anything. Then I told her what I knew. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I had rehearsed this in my car on the way over. I told her I knew about the transfers. I told her I had documentation. I told her the total wasn't $85,000 as our mother had said. It was closer to $112,000 based on what I'd been able to piece together. And I told her that I was having difficulty understanding how an equal split of the house sale could constitute fairness, in any honest use of that word. Diane's face went through several stages. Surprise, then something calculating, then, and I had expected this, defensive indignation. She said, "Mom gave me that money because she wanted to. I never asked her to lie to you." I said, "Did you know she hadn't told me?" She looked out the window. "I figured you knew she helped me sometimes." $112,000 over 11 years isn't sometimes. She said, "I had hard times. You didn't. You have Daniel, you have your good job." "I had hard times too, Diane. I just didn't ask for help." She said, "That's your choice." I looked at her for a moment. "You're right," I said. "It was. And now I'm making a different choice." I told her I wasn't going to agree to a simple equal split of the house proceeds without an honest accounting of what had already been distributed. I told her I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for fairness, actual fairness, not a version of it that conveniently ignored a decade of prior transfers. She said our mother could do what she wanted with her money. I said, "Yes, she can. But she's asking me to sign off on a process and call it equal. I'm not going to do that." I paid for both our coffees and left. That night, Diane called our mother. I know this because my mother called me 20 minutes later, upset, saying that I had ambushed Diane and made her feel attacked. I told my mother what I had said, word for word. There was a long silence. Then she said, "I've already told you, I decided who to help and when." I said, "I understand that. I'm not asking you to feel bad about it. I'm asking you to be honest about it when you talk about what's fair." She said she needed time to think. Update 4. The proposal. In January, I put together a written proposal. Sandra helped me draft it. It was polite, precise, and documented. The proposal was simple. Before any sale proceeds were distributed, I asked for 3 things. First, a full accounting of financial gifts made to either daughter over the past 15 years, with documentation. Not my spreadsheet, an honest accounting from my mother, with her own records. Second, a distribution formula that reflected the actual total being divided. If my mother had $290,000 from the house sale and had already given Diane $112,000, then the estate being distributed was approximately $402,000. A genuinely equal distribution would mean $201,000 each, meaning Diane's share of the house proceeds should be $89,000 and mine $201,000. Third, a conversation about a plan for my mother's potential long-term care needs, so that the responsibilities and resources were understood by everyone in advance. I brought the proposal to my mother's house on a Saturday morning, again with coffee and pastries. She read it at the kitchen table. When she finished, she didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "This is a lawyer document." It was written with the help of a lawyer, yes. "You're threatening me," I said. "Mom, I am not threatening you. I love you. I'm asking you to look at what's actually happened and have an honest conversation about it. That's all." She was quiet again. "Diane is going to be very upset," she said finally. I said, "I know." She was counting on the equal split. "She was counting on something she hadn't earned," I said, gently. "And I think you know that." My mother looked down at the legal pad she'd pulled out of habit, now blank in front of her. She said, "I thought I was protecting you. You're strong. I thought, if I gave you money you'd feel like I was treating you like her." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. "I am strong," I said. "You're right. But strong people still deserve to know the truth." She nodded, very slowly. "Give me a few weeks," she said. Update 5. Resolution. My mother came back to me in February. Not with a phone call. She drove to my house on a Sunday afternoon and sat at my kitchen table with her own folder. She had done her own accounting. Her total was $108,600, slightly lower than mine, because she categorized 2 transfers as loans that Diane had verbally promised to repay. I didn't argue the difference. The order of magnitude was the same. She told me she had spoken to Diane. She said it had been the hardest conversation of her life, which I believe. My mother doesn't do confrontation. She manages. She decides things quietly and distributes them without examination. Having to lay it out in numbers and explain it to both of her children at once was foreign to everything she knew. She told me that Diane had cried. That Kevin had called once and she'd let it go to voicemail. That Diane had, eventually, after several days, said that she understood. I asked what distribution my mother was thinking about. She slid a piece of paper across the table. She had settled on something slightly different from my proposal. She acknowledged approximately $100,000 in prior transfers and proposed an adjusted split of the house proceeds. $80,000 to Diane, $195,000 to me. It didn't perfectly recalibrate every dollar, but it acknowledged the reality. It was honest. I sat with it. "Is this what you actually want?" I asked her. "It's what's fair," she said. "I should have thought about fair a long time ago." I signed the agreement. Sandra reviewed it. Everything was properly documented. The house listed in March and went under contract within 10 days, $337,000. After fees, my mother netted just under $298,000. The checks were issued in April. What I want to say about all of this: Diane and I have not spoken since January. I don't know if that will change. I find that I don't feel rage about it, which surprised me. I feel something more like grief, for the version of our relationship I thought we had, for the conversations I imagined we'd been having while apparently operating on completely different understandings of our family's dynamics. My mother and I have been slowly rebuilding something. She came to James's spring soccer game last month and sat next to me on the bleachers in the cold, and we passed a thermos of coffee back and forth and watched him run around in the mud. She said, at one point, very quietly, "I got it wrong." I didn't say anything because I didn't need to. She got it wrong. We both know it. We're both still here. What I want people to understand about what I did: I didn't take my mother to court. I didn't destroy Diane's relationship with her. I didn't leak anything to extended family or post anything publicly. I got a lawyer's advice, I gathered accurate information, I made a written proposal that was specific and calm, and I sat at my mother's kitchen table and told the truth out loud until someone else was willing to say it too. The $195,000 is in a high-yield savings account. Some of it will go toward Nora's college fund. Some of it, eventually, toward my mother's care if she needs it, and I've made peace with that. Because this was never really about the money. It was about the ledger my mother kept in her head for 30 years, the one that said Diane needed help and I didn't. The one that never got audited because I never asked. I asked. That's the whole story. The number that stays with me isn't $112,000 or $195,000. It's the 7 months in 2019 when Daniel was out of work and I moved money around quietly and told my mother things were fine, and she believed me, and sent Diane $6,000 that November for a car repair. I was fine. I handled it. But it would have been nice to be asked. Edit. I'm not going to respond to comments that say I should have just let it go or that I hurt my mother. I had one conversation, with documentation, and I was polite the entire time. The outcome was a written agreement my mother chose freely. I did not go to court, I did not freeze assets, I did not contact Diane's employer or landlord or anyone else. I made a proposal and I waited. That's what strategic looks like. It's quiet and it takes a long time and sometimes it works. Edit 2. For people asking about the Medicaid look-back issue, Sandra said that with the adjusted distribution, my mother's picture is actually cleaner from a planning standpoint. So yes, the honest accounting helped everyone, including my mother. Edit 3. James scored twice at the soccer game. That part was good.